The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of downtown Seattle as Michael Chen stepped off the city bus at 3rd Avenue, adjusting the worn strap of his second-hand backpack. At 28, he looked like any other young professional, struggling to make ends meet in one of America's most expensive cities. His jeans were clean but faded, his sneakers showed signs of wear, and his simple button-down shirt came from a discount retailer rather than a designer boutique. What the other commuters didn't know was that Michael Chen was the CEO of Pacific Northwest Financial, one of the region's most successful community banks, and that the building he was walking toward housed an institution worth over $2 billion, an institution he had been running in secret for the past 3 years. Morning, Mike, called out Jana Rodriguez, a barista from the coffee cart on the corner. She had been serving him coffee every weekday for 6 months, and like everyone else, she assumed he was just another entry-level worker, trying to afford Seattle's astronomical cost of living. "Good morning, Jana," Michael replied with a genuine smile, accepting his usual order, black coffee in a paper cup that cost $3, a luxury he allowed himself to maintain his cover. "How's business today? Can't complain. The suits from that fancy bank keep me busy," Jana said, nodding toward the imposing glass tower that housed Pacific Northwest Financial. "Those guys spend more on a single coffee order than most people. Make in an hour," Michael nodded sympathetically, knowing that Jana was referring to some of his own employees, highly paid executives who thought nothing of ordering $15 specialty drinks while people like Jana worked long hours just to pay rent. As he walked the final block to his destination, Michael reflected on the unusual path that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, his grandfather, Thomas Chen, had passed away unexpectedly, leaving him the controlling stake in Pacific Northwest Financial. Thomas had built the bank from a small credit union serving Seattle's Asian American community into a major regional institution, always maintaining his commitment to serving ordinary working families rather than just wealthy clients. But when Michael inherited the bank at age 25, he discovered that the institution his grandfather had built was slowly losing its soul. Senior executives had become disconnected from the customers they served. Branch managers treated low-income clients with disdain, and the bank's policies increasingly favored profitable large accounts over the small businesses and working families that had originally made the bank successful. Rather than simply issuing directives from the executive suite, Michael had made a radical decision. He would spend a year working undercover in various positions throughout the bank, learning firsthand how the institution really operated and how its employees treated the customers his grandfather had cared so deeply about. Today marked the beginning of his assignment at the Capitol Hill branch, where he would be working as a teller trainee under the name Mike Chen. Technically, not a lie, since Michael had always gone by Mike with friends, and Chen was indeed his surname. Only 3 people in the entire organization knew his true identity: the head of HR, who had arranged his false employment records, his personal assistant who managed his real CEO duties remotely, and the chairman of the board who had reluctantly agreed to this unconventional leadership approach. Pacific Northwest Financial's Capitol Hill branch was located in a trendy neighborhood, known for its diverse population, local businesses, and mix of young professionals and longtime residents. The branch served everyone from tech workers cashing substantial paychecks to elderly immigrants who still preferred to conduct their banking in person, to small business owners trying to secure loans for coffee shops and bookstores. As Michael approached the employee entrance, he mentally prepared himself for what he knew would be a challenging day. His research had indicated that this particular branch had some of the bank's lowest customer satisfaction scores, highest employee turnover, and most complaints about discriminatory treatment of low-income clients. "You must be the new guy," said a voice behind him. Michael turned to see a man in his early 40s wearing an expensive suit and an expression of mild disdain. "I'm Brad Stevens, assistant branch manager. You're here for the teller position, right?" "That's right," Michael replied, extending his hand. "Mike Chen." Brad's handshake was brief and dismissive, his eyes taking in Michael's modest clothing with obvious disapproval. "Well, Mike, Let me be clear about something from the start. This is a professional establishment serving some very important clients. I expect you to maintain appropriate standards of dress and behavior." Michael nodded, noting the implication that his current appearance fell short of those standards. "I understand." "Good. Follow me, and I'll show you to the break room where you can store your—" Brad paused, looking at Michael's backpack with distaste, belongings. As they entered the bank through the employee entrance, Michael was struck by the stark contrast between the public areas and the behind-the-scenes spaces. The customer-facing areas were elegantly appointed with marble floors, tasteful artwork, and comfortable seating areas, but the employee areas were cramped, poorly lit, and furnished with cheap furniture that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. "The teller training program is pretty straightforward," Brad explained as they walked. "You'll shadow experienced tellers for the first week, learn our systems and procedures, then gradually take on more responsibility. Most people in your position stay for 6 months to a year before moving on to something better." The casual assumption that Michael would need to move on to something better wasn't lost on him. Brad clearly viewed teller positions as stepping stones for people who couldn't do better, rather than as important customer service roles that required skill and professionalism. "Here's your locker," Brad said, opening a small metal compartment in the employee break room. "Lunch is 30 minutes, and you get to 15-minute breaks. Don't abuse the schedule. We track everything very carefully." Michael stored his backpack and followed Brad to the main banking floor, where he was introduced to the other employees. There were 4 teller stations, each staffed by women in their 20s and 30s, who looked up with varying degrees of interest as the new employee was introduced. "This is Mike, our new teller trainee," Brad announced. "Sarah will be showing him the ropes today." Sarah Martinez, a woman in her late 20s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Nice to meet you, Mike. Don't worry. It's not as complicated as it looks." "I appreciate that," Michael replied, immediately sensing that Sarah was the kind of employee his grandfather would have valued. Someone who genuinely cared about doing good work and helping customers. "The first thing you need to understand," Sarah explained as they settled at her station, "is that we serve all kinds of people here. Some of our customers are tech executives with 6-figure salaries, and some are working multiple jobs just to make rent. The key is treating everyone with respect, regardless of their account balance." Michael nodded, impressed by Sarah's attitude. "That makes sense. Unfortunately, not everyone here agrees with that philosophy," Sarah added quietly, glancing toward Brad's office. "Some people think banking should only cater to wealthy clients. They forget that everyone deserves financial services and respect." As the morning progressed, Michael observed the branch's operations with the trained eye of someone who understood banking from both the customer and executive perspectives. He noted which employees went out of their way to help customers, which ones seemed rushed and dismissive, and how the physical layout of the branch either facilitated or hindered good customer service. Around 11 o'clock, an elderly Hispanic woman entered the bank carrying a shopping bag and looking somewhat confused by the modern digital displays and automated systems. Michael watched as she approached the information desk, where a young employee named Kevin was stationed. "Excuse me," the woman said in accented English. "I need to deposit my check and ask about my account." Kevin barely looked up from his computer screen. "You need to use the ATM for deposits. It's right over there." "I prefer to speak with a person," the woman replied. "I have questions about my account." Kevin sighed audibly. "Ma'am, the ATM is faster and more efficient. I really don't have time to handhold every customer through basic transactions." Michael felt his jaw tighten as he watched this interaction. This was exactly the kind of attitude that was driving away the customers his grandfather had worked so hard to serve. "Actually," Sarah said, stepping away from her training duties, "I'd be happy to help you." She gestured toward her teller window. "Right this way." As Sarah patiently assisted the elderly woman with her banking needs, taking time to explain her account balance and answering her questions with genuine care, Michael realized he was witnessing both the problem and the solution within his own bank. Employees like Sarah understood the values Pacific Northwest Financial was supposed to represent, while employees like Kevin had lost sight of the human element that made banking meaningful. "Don't encourage that," Brad said, appearing beside Michael. "If we baby every customer who can't figure out basic technology, we'll never meet our efficiency targets." "But customer service," Michael began. "Customer service means serving profitable customers efficiently," Brad interrupted. "We're not a charity, we're a business." As Michael watched Brad walk away, he realized that the next few weeks would be more challenging than he had anticipated. The disconnect between his grandfather's vision and the current reality was even wider than he had feared. And changing the culture would require more than just policy changes. It would require a fundamental shift in how employees thought about their role in the community. But first, he needed to understand exactly how deep the problems ran, and that meant experiencing firsthand how the bank treated its most vulnerable customers. As the CEO, he had the power to change everything. As Mike the teller trainee, he was about to learn whether that power would be enough to restore the soul of the institution his grandfather had built. 2 weeks into his undercover assignment, Michael had settled into the rhythm of life as a bank teller, and what he discovered disturbed him more each day. The Capitol Hill branch operated on an unofficial but clearly understood hierarchy. Wealthy clients received immediate attention and personalized service. Middle-class customers were processed efficiently but impersonally, and low-income clients were often treated with barely concealed contempt. On this particular Tuesday morning, Michael was working at his assigned station when he noticed a young woman in her early 20s, approaching with obvious nervousness. She wore scrubs that identified her as a healthcare worker, and she carried herself with the cautious posture of someone who had learned to expect disappointment from financial institutions. "Excuse me," she said to Michael, her voice soft and uncertain. "I'd like to apply for a small business loan." "What type of business?" Michael asked, genuinely interested. "I want to start a home health care service for elderly people in the neighborhood," she explained. "I'm a certified nursing assistant, and I've seen how many seniors need help but can't afford the big agencies." Michael was impressed by both her idea and her obvious dedication to serving the community. "That sounds like exactly the kind of business this neighborhood needs. Let me get you the application materials." As he gathered the necessary paperwork, Brad Stevens appeared at his elbow with a disapproving expression. "What's going on here?" Brad asked, though his tone suggested he already disapproved of whatever it was. "Ms. Rodriguez would like to apply for a small business loan," Michael explained. Brad looked at the young woman with undisguised skepticism, taking in her modest appearance and work uniform. "What's your credit score?" he asked bluntly. "I'm not sure exactly," she admitted. "I had some difficulties when I was younger, but I've been working steadily for 3 years now, and I've been saving money for this business." "Let me be direct with you," Brad said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "Small business loans require excellent credit, substantial collateral, and a proven track record. Frankly, you don't look like someone who meets our lending criteria." Michael felt his blood boil at Brad's casual cruelty, but he forced himself to remain in character. "Maybe we could at least review her application." "Mike," Brad interrupted sharply, "you're here to process transactions, not to waste time on applications that will never be approved." "Ms. Rodriguez," she said quietly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Ms. Rodriguez, I suggest you speak with some smaller lending institutions that specialize in higher-risk loans. Pacific Northwest Financial focuses on established businesses with strong financial profiles." As the young woman walked away, clearly humiliated by the interaction, Michael struggled to control his anger. Pacific Northwest Financial had been built on the principle of supporting community entrepreneurs, and his grandfather had specifically established loan programs for exactly the kind of business Ms. Rodriguez wanted to create. "That was unnecessarily harsh," Michael said to Brad once the customer was gone. "That was reality," Brad replied. "Do you know how much time and money the bank wastes processing loan applications from people who have no business asking for credit? It's not cruel to be honest about someone's prospects, but we didn't even look at her application, I've been in banking for 15 years, Brad said dismissively. I can assess credit worthiness just by looking at someone. That girl has bad credit, minimal assets, and probably student loans. She's exactly the kind of borrower who defaults and costs the bank money. Michael wanted to point out that Brad's assessment was based entirely on assumptions about the woman's appearance and background, but he knew that revealing his true knowledge about lending practices would blow his cover. The afternoon brought an even more disturbing incident. Around 3 o'clock, an elderly African-American man entered the branch carrying an envelope and looking around uncertainly at the modern technology and sleek furnishings. "Can I help you?" asked Kevin, the same employee Michael had observed being dismissive to the Hispanic woman 2 weeks earlier. "I need to cash my Social Security check," the man said, approaching Kevin's desk. "Do you have an account with us?" Kevin asked without looking up from his computer. "No, but I've been cashing my checks here for 6 months. The lady who used to work here said it was no problem." Kevin sighed audibly. "Sir, our policy is that we only cash checks for account holders. You'll need to open an account or find another bank, but I don't have the money for the minimum balance," the elderly man explained. "I just need to cash my check so I can pay my rent. That's not my problem," Kevin said bluntly. Bank policy is bank policy. Michael knew that Pacific Northwest Financial did indeed have a policy allowing Social Security check cashing for non-customers with appropriate identification and a small fee. Kevin was either ignorant of the policy or choosing to ignore it. Actually, Michael interjected, standing up from his station, "We do offer check cashing services for Social Security recipients. Let me help you." Kevin shot him an annoyed look. "Mike, don't complicate things. It's easier to just—" "It's not complicated," Michael said firmly. "It's our policy to serve Social Security recipients, and it takes 5 minutes." As Michael helped the elderly man cash his check, he noticed Brad watching the interaction with obvious disapproval. When the customer left, Brad approached Michael's station with a stern expression. "Mike, I need to speak with you privately," Brad said, gesturing toward a small office area. Once they were out of earshot of customers, Brad's friendly fawade disappeared entirely. "Let me make something very clear to you. Your job is to follow instructions, not to make policy decisions. When Kevin tells a customer we can't help them, you don't contradict him in front of everyone." "But we do offer check cashing services," Michael began. "We offer those services to the right kind of customers," Brad interrupted. "Customers who look like they belong in a bank like this. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Michael understood exactly what Brad was saying, and it made him sick. "Are you telling me to discriminate based on how people look?" "I'm telling you to use common sense," Brad replied. "This is an upscale branch serving a professional clientele. When we start attracting the wrong kind of customers, it drives away the right kind of customers." "What makes someone the wrong kind of customer?" Michael asked, though he dreaded the answer. Brad looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then leaned closer. "Look, I'm not saying anything officially, but you need to understand the reality of banking. Poor people, old people, people who don't speak perfect English, they're not profitable customers. They require more time, they complain more, and they don't bring in significant revenue. So we should just refuse to serve them?" Michael asked, struggling to keep his voice level. "We should encourage them to find institutions that are more appropriate for their needs," Brad said carefully. "There are community banks and credit unions that specialize in serving low-income customers. We focus on clients who can afford our premium services." Michael felt like he was hearing a foreign language. Nothing Brad was saying aligned with Pacific Northwest Financial's stated mission or the values his grandfather had instilled in the institution. "Brad," Michael said carefully, "doesn't this approach go against the bank's community commitment statements?" Brad laughed dismissively. "Those statements are marketing materials, Mike. They're designed to make us look good to regulators and activists. In reality, banks exist to make money for shareholders, not to provide social services to people who can't afford them." As Brad walked away, Michael sat down heavily at his station, overwhelmed by what he had learned. The branch wasn't just providing poor customer service. It was actively discriminating against exactly the kind of customers Pacific Northwest Financial had been founded to serve. Sarah noticed his distress and approached quietly. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Michael replied. "Sarah, can I ask you something? How long has Brad been pushing this selective service approach?" Sarah glanced around nervously before answering. "It's gotten worse over the past year. There's pressure from upper management to improve profitability, and Brad interprets that as focusing only on high net worth customers. A lot of us don't like it, but what? But we need our jobs," Sarah finished quietly. "And Brad makes it clear that employees who don't follow his approach won't be here long." Michael nodded, understanding that the problem was bigger than just one bad manager. The culture of discrimination had been allowed to flourish because employees feared for their job security, and because upper management, himself included, hadn't been paying close enough attention to what was happening at the branch level. As the day ended and Michael prepared to leave, he realized that his undercover experiment had revealed problems far worse than he had imagined. The institution his grandfather had built to serve working families had become a place where working families were actively discouraged from seeking services. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin documenting everything he witnessed, building a case for the comprehensive changes that would be necessary to restore Pacific Northwest Financial's integrity. But first, he needed to experience the full extent of the discrimination firsthand, even if it meant enduring treatment that would make him question everything he thought he knew about the bank he led. 3 weeks into his undercover assignment, Michael had documented dozens of incidents of discriminatory behavior, from subtle dismissiveness toward elderly customers to outright refusal of services that should have been available to anyone with proper identification. But nothing had prepared him for what happened on the Thursday morning that would finally push him to his breaking point. Michael arrived at work to find an unusual level of tension in the air. Brad Stevens was pacing around the banking floor with obvious agitation, checking his watch repeatedly and adjusting his tie in a way that suggested he was expecting important visitors. "Listen up, everyone," Brad announced to the staff. "We have regional executives visiting today, including some potential investors who are considering a partnership with our bank. I want this branch running perfectly, no problems, no complications, and absolutely no situations that might reflect poorly on our professional standards." Sarah caught Michael's eye and mouthed, "Here we go," apparently recognizing the signs of one of Brad's periodic campaigns to impress upper management. Around 10:30, Michael noticed a commotion near the front entrance. A teenage boy, probably 16 or 17 years old, had entered the bank and was looking around uncertainly. He wore jeans with holes in the knees, a faded hoodie, and sneakers that had seen better days. In his hand, he carried what appeared to be a paycheck from a local fast food restaurant. Kevin immediately spotted the teenager and approached with the aggressive posture of someone looking for trouble. "Hey, kid, what are you doing here? I need to cash my paycheck." The boy replied politely, "My mom said I could do it here. You got an account?" Kevin asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be problematic. "No, sir, but my mom has an account here, and she said, can't cash checks without an account." Kevin interrupted, "You need to go somewhere else." Michael stood up from his station, recognizing that this was exactly the kind of situation where the bank's actual policies were being ignored in favor of discriminatory assumptions. "Actually, we can cash payroll checks with proper ID and a small fee." Kevin shot him a warning look. "Mike, this isn't your customer. It's fine," Michael replied, walking over to the teenager. "What's your name?" "Marcus Thompson," the boy replied. "I work at the McDonald's down the street, and this is my first paycheck. My mom, Gloria Thompson, she banks here and said you guys could help me." Michael recognized the name Gloria Thompson as one of the bank's long-term customers, a single mother who worked as a hospital custodian and had been banking with Pacific Northwest Financial for over 8 years. She was exactly the kind of loyal customer his grandfather had valued. "Let me help you with that," Michael said, leading Marcus toward his teller station. "Mike, Brad's voice cut across the banking floor with sharp authority. What are you doing? Helping a customer cash his paycheck, Michael replied evenly. That kid is not a customer, Brad said, approaching with obvious anger. And this is not the time for charity cases. Michael felt his temper flare at the casual cruelty of referring to a working teenager as a charity case, but he forced himself to remain calm. Marcus is Gloria Thompson's son, and he has a legitimate payroll check to cash. I don't care whose son he is, Brad snapped. Look at him. Does he look like the kind of person we want in this branch when executives are visiting? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Michael realized that Brad wasn't even trying to hide his prejudice anymore. Marcus, meanwhile, stood, frozen with embarrassment, clearly understanding that he was being judged based on his appearance rather than his legitimate business needs. Get out of here, you poor boy, Brad said directly to Marcus, his voice loud enough to be heard throughout the branch. This bank serves professional customers, not street kids looking for handouts. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. This wasn't just poor customer service or bureaucratic inflexibility. This was naked classism directed at a teenager whose only crime was needing to cash his first paycheck while dressed in clothes that revealed his family's economic struggles. Sir, Marcus said quietly, I'm not asking for a handout. I just want to cash my check so I can give my mom money for groceries. I don't care what sob story you have, Brad replied coldly. You don't belong here, and I want you out. Before my visitors arrive. Michael looked around the branch and realized that all activity had stopped. Other customers were staring at the confrontation with expressions ranging from shock to disgust, while employees stood frozen, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their manager's behavior. Sarah started to move forward as if to intervene, but Kevin grabbed her arm and shook his head, warning her not to get involved. You heard me, Brad continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. Get out of here before I call security. Marcus's face flushed with shame and anger, but he maintained his composure with a maturity that impressed Michael. Yes, sir, he said quietly, turning toward the door. Wait, Michael said, stepping forward. Marcus, don't leave. You have every right to be here. Brad whirled around to face Michael with fury in his eyes. Mike, you are out of line. Get back to your station immediately. No, Michael replied, his voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone in the room. I won't stand by while you humiliate a customer's son for no reason other than prejudice. Prejudice? Brad laughed harshly. I'm running a business, not a social service agency. And if you can't understand the difference, maybe you're in the wrong job. Michael felt something snap inside him. 3 weeks of witnessing discrimination. 3 weeks of watching employees like Brad destroy the values his grandfather had built. 3 weeks of pretending to be powerless, while the bank's reputation crumbled one cruel interaction at a time. Actually, Brad, Michael said, his voice becoming dangerously quiet. I think you're the one who's in the wrong job. Excuse me. Brad stepped closer, apparently thinking he could intimidate Michael into backing down. I said you're in the wrong job, Michael repeated, louder this time. Because someone who treats customers the way you just treated Marcus has no business working at Pacific Northwest Financial. You're fired, Brad said immediately. Clean out your locker and get out. And you, he pointed at Marcus, you leave, too, or I'm calling the police. Michael looked around the room, seeing the shocked faces of his co-workers, the disgusted expressions of the customers who had witnessed the confrontation, and the humiliated posture of a teenager who had done nothing wrong except try to cash his first paycheck while poor. Actually, Brad, Michael said, reaching into his wallet and pulling out a business card. I don't think you have the authority to fire me. He handed the card to Brad and watched as the man's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally terror as he read the words Michael Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Pacific Northwest Financial. The silence in the branch was deafening as Brad stared at the card, his hands beginning to shake as the implications of what had just happened sank in. That's right, Michael said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position. I'm the CEO of this bank, and I've spent the past 3 weeks working undercover to understand exactly how my employees treat the customers my grandfather founded this institution to serve." He turned to address the entire branch. "And what I've discovered is that some people have forgotten that this bank exists to serve our community, not to judge people based on their clothes or their bank balance." Michael walked over to Marcus, who was staring at him in amazement. "Marcus, I apologize for how you were treated today. Let me personally cash your check, and I'd like to help you open your first bank account with no minimum balance and no fees." As he led Marcus to his station, Michael could hear Brad stammering behind him, trying to formulate an explanation or apology that might save his job. But Michael was no longer interested in hearing excuses. The reckoning had begun, and it was long overdue. The following Monday morning, Michael Chen stood before the assembled staff of the Capitol Hill branch, no longer disguised as a struggling bank teller, but revealed as the CEO of Pacific Northwest Financial. The weekend had been a whirlwind of meetings, policy reviews, and difficult conversations as he began the process of transforming the culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish. Brad Stevens was conspicuously absent. He had been terminated Friday afternoon after a brief meeting where Michael had reviewed the documented incidents of discriminatory behavior that had occurred under his management. In his place stood Maria Gonzalez, a veteran banker whom Michael had promoted from another branch, someone with a track record of excellent customer service and community engagement. "I want to be completely transparent with all of you," Michael began, addressing the nervous group of employees who were still processing the revelation of his true identity. "Over the past 3 weeks, I witnessed behaviors and attitudes that fundamentally contradict everything Pacific Northwest Financial is supposed to represent." Sarah Martinez, who had been the most helpful and professional employee during his undercover time, raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Chen, are we all going to be fired?" "That's a fair question," Michael replied. "And the answer is no, not unless you were actively participating in discrimination or treating customers with disrespect. I understand that many of you were afraid to speak up because you needed your jobs and didn't want to challenge management." He gestured toward Maria, who stepped forward with a warm smile. "Maria will be your new branch manager, and she's going to help implement some major changes to how we operate. But first, I want to address what happened with Marcus Thompson last Thursday." Michael pulled out his phone and showed a news article to the group. The story of how Marcus was treated went viral over the weekend. Someone in the branch recorded part of the confrontation and posted it online. We've received thousands of comments, most of them expressing outrage at the way a working teenager was humiliated for trying to cash his first paycheck. The employees looked uncomfortable as Michael continued, but we've also received hundreds of messages from customers sharing their own stories of discrimination at various Pacific Northwest Financial branches. "This isn't just a problem here, it's a systemic issue that I intend to address bank-wide." Kevin, who had been one of the worst offenders during Michael's undercover observation, shifted nervously in his chair. "Mr. Chen, I want to apologize for..." "Kevin," Michael interrupted gently, "your apology is noted. But what I need from you going forward is changed behavior. I need you to understand that every person who walks through our doors deserves respect and professional service, regardless of their appearance, accent, or account balance." Michael turned to address the entire group. "Pacific Northwest Financial was founded by my grandfather to serve working families, small business owners, and people who were often overlooked by larger banks. Somehow, we've lost sight of that mission, and I take responsibility for not recognizing the problem sooner." Maria stepped forward to outline the immediate changes that would be implemented. "Starting today, we're instituting new customer service protocols. Every employee will undergo training on respectful communication, cultural sensitivity, and inclusive banking practices. We're also implementing a customer feedback system that will allow people to report both positive and negative experiences directly to senior management." Additionally, Michael added, "We're establishing a community outreach program that will include financial literacy classes, small business workshops, and partnerships with local organizations that serve low-income Families and immigrants. Sarah raised her hand again. What about our performance metrics? Brad always emphasized efficiency and processing large transactions quickly. Those metrics are changing, Michael replied. We'll still measure efficiency, but we'll also measure customer satisfaction, community engagement, and how well we serve all segments of our customer base. An employee who takes extra time to help an elderly customer or explains banking options to someone opening their first account will be rewarded, not penalized. Over the following weeks, Michael implemented changes throughout the Pacific Northwest financial system. He instituted mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all employees, revised lending policies to remove subjective barriers that had discriminated against minority applicants, and established customer service standards that explicitly prohibited judgment based on appearance or economic status. Most importantly, he made Marcus Thompson the face of the bank's transformation. The teenager, who had initially been humiliated by his treatment at the bank, became the star of a new advertising campaign that emphasized Pacific Northwest Financial's commitment to serving customers at every stage of their financial journey. When I walked into that bank to cash my first paycheck, Marcus said in a television commercial that aired throughout the Pacific Northwest, I was treated like I didn't belong there. But CEO Michael Chen showed me that everyone deserves respect and opportunity, regardless of where they come from or what they're wearing. The campaign was a massive success, generating positive media coverage and attracting thousands of new customers who appreciated the bank's renewed commitment to community service. More importantly, it sent a clear message to employees throughout the organization that discriminatory behavior would not be tolerated. 3 months after the confrontation that had revealed Michael's true identity, the Capitol Hill branch had become one of the bank's highest-rated locations. For customer satisfaction, Sarah Martinez had been promoted to assistant manager. Kevin had successfully completed sensitivity training and had become one of the branch's most improved employees. And Maria Gonzalez had implemented community programs that were being replicated at other branches. On a sunny Tuesday morning, Michael visited the branch for a routine inspection and was pleased to see the transformation in action. An elderly Hispanic woman was being patiently helped by Kevin, who took time to explain her account options in both English and Spanish. Sarah was working with a young couple to secure their first home loan, treating them with the same professionalism she would show to millionaire clients. And Maria was conducting a financial literacy workshop in the branch's community room, teaching local small business owners about cash flow management and loan applications. Mr. Chen called a familiar voice. Michael turned to see Marcus Thompson approaching, wearing the uniform of a local community college where he had enrolled using money he'd saved from his fast food job. Marcus, how are you doing? Really well, sir. I wanted to thank you again for what you did, not just for me, but for everyone who comes into this bank. Michael smiled, thinking about his grandfather and the values that had inspired the founding of Pacific Northwest Financial. Marcus, you taught me something important that day. You showed me that character and dignity don't depend on bank balances or expensive clothes. They come from within, and they deserve to be recognized and respected. As Michael prepared to leave the branch, he reflected on the lessons he had learned during his time undercover. Money and position could isolate leaders from the reality of their organizations, but authentic leadership required understanding how policies and culture affected real people in their daily lives. The transformation of Pacific Northwest Financial was ongoing, but Michael was confident that the bank was finally living up to the values his grandfather had instilled, serving everyone with respect, providing opportunities for growth, and recognizing that true success was measured not just in profits, but in the positive impact on the community they served.